When my daughter-in-law called to tell me my son was dead, she cried so convincingly, I almost believed her. Almost. My son Daniel was 44 years old, a structural engineer who designed bridges for a living, careful, methodical, never reckless. He had been driving the same route along Highway 401 outside Kingston, Ontario for 3 years. He knew every curve of that road. So, when the police told me his car had gone off the guardrail on a clear Tuesday morning in November, no ice, no fog, no other vehicles involved, something inside me went very quiet. Not the quiet of grief. The quiet of a man who spent 32 years as a fraud investigator for the Canada Revenue Agency, learning to recognize when a story has a hole in it. His wife, I'll call her my daughter-in-law, because she stopped being anything else to me that morning, was already at my front door in Napanee before the police even left. Tear-streaked, arms open, calling me Dad the way she always did. She moved through my kitchen making tea like she owned the place. She had always moved through spaces like she owned them. Then my phone rang. I didn't recognize the number, but I answered it the way you answer everything when your son has just died, hoping somehow it's a mistake, that someone is about to tell you it wasn't him. It wasn't a mistake. It was Margaret Okafor, Daniel's project manager at the engineering firm in Kingston. Her voice was careful, controlled, the voice of someone who had rehearsed what they were about to say. Miss Holt, I need you to come to the office. Alone. Don't bring your daughter-in-law. A pause. There's something you need to see, and I think you may be in more danger than you realize. I looked across my kitchen at my daughter-in-law, wrapping her hands around a mug of my tea, dabbing her eyes with my dish towel, performing grief with the dedication of a woman who had been practicing. I told Margaret I'd be there in the morning. That night I did not sleep. I sat in the dark of my living room with the police report they'd given me, reading it the way I used to read financial statements when something felt wrong but I couldn't yet say why. The report noted the vehicle had sustained catastrophic brake failure. The car had gone through the guardrail at high speed, on a straight section of highway, which made no mechanical sense unless something had failed completely and suddenly. Daniel had his vehicle serviced. I knew because he'd texted me about it 3 weeks earlier, complaining good-naturedly about the bill. Full brake job, rotors, pads, fluid flush. The shop was a place called Rideau Auto on Division Street that he'd used for years. Brake systems that have just been fully serviced do not fail catastrophically on their own 3 weeks later. That thought sat in my chest like a stone. My daughter-in-law had gone upstairs to the guest room around 10, saying she didn't want to be alone in the house she'd shared with Daniel. I'd said, of course, because I was still pretending. I am good at pretending. 32 years catching people who thought they were smarter than they were had taught me that the most powerful thing you can do is let someone believe they're winning. I heard her upstairs on her phone, not crying, talking. Her voice low but animated, nothing like the broken woman who'd sat across my kitchen table. I couldn't make out words, but I didn't need to. I already knew what kind of conversation sounds like grief, and what kind sounds like planning. Margaret Okafor met me at the firm's offices on Princess Street at 8 the next morning, before anyone else arrived. She was a compact woman in her 50s, the kind of person who measures every word before spending it. She locked the door behind me and led me to a small boardroom. There was a folder on the table and a laptop already open. Daniel came to me 6 weeks ago, she said. She didn't sit. He was frightened. He didn't say that word, but I know what frightened looks like in someone who is usually calm. He asked me to hold something for him. He said if anything happened to him, I should give it to you, not to his wife, only to you. She slid the folder across the table. Inside were bank statements, joint account statements that Daniel had apparently printed and annotated in his careful draftsman's handwriting. Withdrawals circled in red. Over 7 months, nearly $38,000 had left their joint accounts in increments that ranged from $800 to $3,000 at a time, always under the threshold that would trigger an automatic review, always to the same recipient. The notation simply read, K. Merritt. There was also a handwritten note from Daniel. I recognized his printing immediately, that architectural precision he'd had since he was a boy. She says it's debt from before we married. I checked. There is no debt. No credit cards, no loans in that name. Where is this money going? Who is K. Merritt? Beneath the note, a life insurance policy. $800,000. Daniel's signature at the bottom, dated 4 months before he died. His handwriting looked nothing like the careful printing in his note. It looked like someone had traced his signature from something else. Margaret sat down across from me. He told me he was going to confront her. I told him to wait, to document more first. He said he was running out of time. She pressed her lips together. I think he meant that literally. I drove home along the 401, the same highway where my son had died. I drove slowly, which I never do. I looked at the guardrail. I thought about a brake system that had been certified safe 3 weeks before it catastrophically failed on a clear, dry morning. My daughter-in-law had made breakfast. Eggs, toast, fresh coffee from the good beans she'd brought herself because she'd always said mine were too mild. She smiled when I came in. Warm, concerned. She asked if I'd slept. She mentioned that we should think about the arrangements for the estate soon. Nothing pressing, just practical. She used the phrase our future, and I noticed she included herself in it without thinking to ask if she belonged there. You're right, I said. We should think about it. Her shoulders dropped slightly, not with grief, with relief. I spent the next 2 days doing what I had spent a career doing, building a file. I called the Kingston Police Service and spoke to the detective handling Daniel's case, a young officer named Sergeant Beaumont, who was polite and sympathetic and had already begun treating the accident as closed. He told me brake failures happened, especially in Ontario winters. I pointed out it was a clear November morning and the car had been fully serviced 3 weeks prior. He said he understood my concern and would note it. I understood what that meant. I had heard it from people I was auditing for 20 years. It meant he wasn't going to do anything. I drove to Rideau Auto and asked to speak to the owner, a man named Frank Thibodeau, who had the kind of handshake that comes from 40 years working with tools. When I told him Daniel was my son, he went quiet in the way that people do when they've already heard the news, and it has been sitting badly with them. I did that brake job myself, he said. New Brembo rotors, fresh pads, full fluid flush. I test drove it. Those brakes were perfect. He looked at me steadily. There is no mechanical reason those brakes should have failed. I asked if anyone else had brought Daniel's car in before that service. Frank pulled up his records on an old desktop computer. He found something, and his expression shifted. His wife brought it in about 6 weeks before that service. Said it was for a routine oil change. But Daniel hadn't booked anything. He scrolled further. She wasn't alone. There was a man with her. I remember because he wandered into the service bay, which customers aren't supposed to do, and one of my guys had to ask him to leave. Do you know who he was? Frank shook his head. But he had security footage. He kept 90 days of it on a drive in the office. We found the clip in 20 minutes. My daughter-in-law getting out of the passenger side of a truck while a man in a mechanic's jacket climbed out of the driver's side. He moved around the service bay with the confidence of someone who knew exactly what he was looking at. Frank leaned toward the screen. His jaw tightened. I know him. That's Kyle Merritt. He used to do brake and suspension work at a shop over in Belleville. Got fired 2 years ago for pulling parts off customer vehicles and replacing them with used ones. Guy knew brake systems inside and out. Hey, Merritt. I drove home with Frank's printed screenshots in a folder on the passenger seat, and the name Kyle Merritt written in my notebook 3 times, underlined. My daughter-in-law had rearranged my living room while I was gone, just slightly. A chair moved closer to her preferred spot on the sofa, her things accumulating on the side table. Small acts of occupation. She mentioned over dinner that the property in Napanee was probably too large for one person, and had I thought about downsizing, there were lovely retirement communities in the area, well-run, full amenities, and the house could sell for a good number in this market. Maybe 600,000, she said, helping herself to more of the pasta she'd cooked. It's a seller's market. You'd have real security. That's something to think about, I said. She smiled. I just want you to be taken care of, Dad. That's all. I nodded and said nothing, and thought about the $38,000 and the life insurance policy with my son's forged signature and a fired mechanic named Kyle Merritt, who knew how to make brake failures look like accidents. That night I called an old colleague from my CRA days, a woman named Patricia Beausoleil, who had left the agency and opened a forensic accounting practice in Ottawa. I explained what I had without explaining all of it, She agreed to start immediately. 2 days later, I contacted a private investigator, a retired OPP officer named Robert Desmarais, who operated out of Kingston. We met at a Tim Hortons on Bath Road, neutral ground. He listened without interrupting while I laid out the timeline. When I finished, he looked at me across the table and said, "You've already done half the work." I gave him Kyle Merritt's name and a photograph from the security footage. I told him I needed to know the nature and extent of his relationship with my daughter-in-law, and I needed it documented legally, audio, and photograph, whatever Ontario's privacy legislation permitted. The retainer was $2,000. I wrote the check without hesitation. For the next 10 days, I played the role of a grieving, slightly confused old man with more focus than I had brought to anything in years. At home, my daughter-in-law escalated slowly and steadily. She brought printouts from real estate listings. She mentioned a financial advisor she thought I should meet with, someone who could help me restructure after Daniel's estate settled. She asked gently whether I had updated my own will recently, since these things were so important to have in order. She placed her hand over mine when she said it. I told her I'd been meaning to do that it was all so overwhelming, that I was grateful she was there to help. Each conversation I recorded on a small digital recorder I kept in my shirt pocket. I had used the same model during field investigations for a decade. In Ontario, recording a conversation you are personally participating in is entirely legal. I understood this. She did not seem to. Robert's reports arrived by encrypted email every 2 days. Surveillance confirmed regular meetings between my daughter-in-law and Kyle Merritt, 3 times a week, at a motel outside Napanee, off the 401. They were not careful. People in the middle of a plan they believe is already working rarely are. On the 8th day, Robert obtained audio through a directional microphone positioned outside a ground-floor motel window. He sent me a voice note to warn me before he sent the file. I listened to it alone in my car, in my driveway, with the engine off. Kyle Merritt's voice was flat and impatient. "The old man still hasn't signed anything. You said 2 weeks." My daughter-in-law's voice was measured, slightly annoyed. "He's processing. He's grieving. Give me a bit more time. He's almost ready to talk about the house." "What about the insurance? Has it come through yet?" "These things take time, Kyle. The policy was only 4 months old. They'll investigate a bit first. It's fine. It better be fine. I'm not sitting in Belleville waiting around forever. You'll get your half. Stop panicking." A pause. "He won't be a problem much longer." I sat in my driveway for a long time after the recording ended. The maple at the edge of my yard had gone completely bare. Daniel used to climb that tree when he was 8 years old, and I would stand below him pretending to be calm. I thought about that. I thought about the fact that my son had died alone on a November highway because the woman he had trusted with his life had arranged it with a man who knew how to sever a brake line and make it look like metal fatigue. I did not allow myself to feel that fully yet. There was still work to do. I called Patricia Beausoleil. She had been thorough, as I knew she would be. Over 18 months, $41,000 had left Daniel and my daughter-in-law's joint accounts. Transfers that had been disguised as household expenses, a new appliance, dental costs, a vehicle repair, none of which corresponded to any actual purchase Patricia could trace. All of it ending up in accounts linked to Kyle Merritt. Then Patricia said, "There's something else." She had found email correspondence. My daughter-in-law had used a personal email account linked to a loyalty program, the kind of digital paper trail that people forget they leave. Kyle had used his own account carelessly. Patricia had traced them through financial records connected to an online purchase made on Daniel's credit card, a purchase of automotive components, placed 4 months before his death. The emails were explicit. Kyle discussing specific parts, a brake line pressure adapter, a method of introducing a controlled failure point that would hold temporarily before giving way under highway speed. My daughter-in-law responding, "Make sure it looks like wear, not damage. It has to be an accident." A later message from Kyle. Timing? My daughter-in-law's reply, "After the policy goes through, not before. We need the full amount." And then, 2 weeks before Daniel died, a message from my daughter-in-law, Tuesday morning. He takes the 401 to Kingston, high-speed section near the exit. Do it, Sunday night. Daniel had died on a Tuesday morning in November. I drove to Kingston the next morning and walked into the offices of a law firm on Brock Street, where a partner named Christine Lalonde practiced wrongful death litigation. Her reputation was substantial. She had argued before the Ontario Superior Court of Justice on multiple occasions, and she was known for being methodical and unsentimental, which is exactly what I needed. She spent 2 hours with my documents. She made notes. She asked precise questions. When I had laid out everything, she looked up at me and said, "Mr. Holt, this is one of the strongest bodies of evidence I have seen outside of a criminal proceeding. You have motive, means, premeditation, documentation of the conspiracy, financial proof, surveillance, and explicit written evidence of intent to commit murder." She recommended I take the criminal evidence to the Kingston Police Service that afternoon and request a meeting with a senior detective, not Sergeant Beaumont. I took her advice. The detective I was connected to was a woman named Inspector Claire Fontaine, who had transferred from the OPP Major Crimes Unit 2 years earlier. She received me in a small conference room, and I watched her expression change as she worked through the folder. Not dramatically, just incrementally, the way a professional's face changes when they recognize something important. "The emails," she said, reading them carefully. "These are explicit. My forensic accountant has authenticated them. Origin accounts, timestamps, the credit card trail to the automotive parts purchase. It's all documented." Inspector Fontaine looked at me steadily. "Mr. Holt, I want to be honest with you. We closed this as an accident. That was an error. I'm reopening it as a homicide investigation, effective today." She paused. "I apologize for the initial handling. You deserved better than that." It was the first time anyone official had said something honest to me since Daniel died. I went home and made dinner and sat across from my daughter-in-law, who had cooked a roast chicken and opened a bottle of wine she had brought from somewhere. And I listened to her talk about the house and the estate and the future, and I thought about the trap closing 1 degree at a time. She did not know about Inspector Fontaine. She did not know about Patricia's email findings. She did not know that Robert Desmarais had positioned a secondary audio device under Kyle Merritt's truck the day before, anticipating that the police investigation would create pressure, and pressure creates conversation. That conversation happened 4 days later. Robert sent me the file at 11 in the morning. Kyle Merritt had gone to a coffee shop in Belleville, where my daughter-in-law was waiting. Robert's recording caught everything through the truck's device as they moved to the parking lot. Kyle's voice was tight and frightened. "There's a detective asking questions. Somebody talked to the garage owner. They're looking at the service records." My daughter-in-law, slower, more controlled. "Stay calm. There's nothing to find." I put the work in on a Sunday night, on a car parked in a residential street. Someone could have seen me. "No one saw you. You don't know that." His voice cracked. "I cut the line on your orders. You promised this would be clean. Now there's a detective." A pause. Then her voice. "Kyle, stop talking. I want to know when the insurance pays out. I want my half of that money. Keep your voice down. Tell me when I get paid." A long silence. Then, "The money isn't coming. The insurance company has flagged the policy. It's under review." Her voice had gone flat, emptied of its warmth. "We may have a problem." "What kind of problem?" "The kind where you don't panic, and you don't say another word to anyone. Can you manage that?" Robert had captured every word. More importantly, Kyle Merritt had just confirmed, on audio, that he had cut the brake line on her orders. My daughter-in-law had not denied it. I forwarded the file to Inspector Fontaine and Christine Lalonde within the hour. Fontaine moved quickly. Within 48 hours, she had obtained warrants for Kyle Merritt's phone records, his financial accounts, and his email. 2 officers brought him in for questioning on a Thursday morning. By that afternoon, faced with the email evidence, the financial trail, and the audio recording, his lawyer had contacted the Crown Attorney's office to discuss cooperation. Christine filed the civil wrongful death action the same day in Ontario Superior Court. We were claiming $2.2 million in damages, loss of companionship, financial dependency, emotional harm, and punitive damages designed to ensure my daughter-in-law received nothing. Christine also filed a formal challenge to the life insurance payout, submitting all evidence to Manulife with a legal opinion that under Ontario law, a beneficiary who participates in the murder of the insured is disqualified from the proceeds. Manulife suspended payment pending criminal investigation within 72 hours. My daughter-in-law did not know this yet. She was still at my house, still talking about the property, still asking casually about my own estate planning. One evening, she brought me a pamphlet for a retirement residence in Belleville that she said had a lovely river view and excellent healthcare support. She mentioned I might find it comforting, more manageable. She sat close to me on the sofa and said, very gently, that she just wanted me to be safe. I recorded all of it. 3 days before Inspector Fontaine planned to execute the arrest warrant, Kyle Merritt arrived at my daughter-in-law's car in a parking lot outside a grocery store in Napanee. Robert was already in position. The audio was remarkable in its clarity. Kyle had stopped pretending to be calm. They brought me in. They have the emails. They have the money trail. It's over. My daughter-in-law's voice was sharp, urgent. You talked to them? I didn't say anything, but they know. They know everything. A pause. We have to run. We're not running. Running confirms guilt. I sabotaged that car. I am guilty. His voice was shaking now. I did what you asked me to do. I modified the brake line exactly where you told me to, on exactly the night you told me to. I waited for the news. You called me crying and I knew it had worked. And now, stop talking. I want the money you promised me. I want out of this. In the background of the recording, faint and barely audible, my daughter-in-law said something that Robert's equipment just barely caught. There is no out. I sat in my study that evening with all of it laid out in front of me. The emails, the bank statements, Patricia's forensic audit, Robert's surveillance reports, the recording of Kyle's explicit admission that he had modified the brake line at my daughter-in-law's direction on the night she had specified on the vehicle she had brought him access to, the recording of her response to his confession, which was not denial. Christine had told me this was enough. Inspector Fontaine had told me this was enough. I believed them both. I allowed myself for exactly 1 minute to think about Daniel. His voice on the phone 2 weeks before he died, calling to complain cheerfully about the brake job bill, telling me the car was finally running perfectly, saying he'd drive up to Napanee for Christmas and bring that wine I liked from the LCBO in Kingston. I had said I'd look forward to it. He had said, "See you then, Dad." I folded that memory carefully and put it somewhere I would not lose it. The warrant was executed at 6:15 on a Friday morning. I was awake. I had been awake since 4. I sat in the kitchen with my coffee and waited, and at 6:14 I heard 3 vehicles pull onto my street. Inspector Fontaine came to the door herself. She nodded at me once. Then she called up my staircase in a clear, even voice and informed my daughter-in-law she was being detained for questioning in connection with the death of Daniel Holt, and that she had the right to retain and instruct counsel without delay. The footsteps on the stairs stopped. A long silence. Then they started again, slowly. She appeared at the bottom of the stairs in the bathrobe she'd brought from Daniel's house, and for a fraction of a second I saw something real on her face. Not grief, not fear. Pure calculation flickering behind her eyes as she assessed the situation and understood it was finished. Then she looked at me. "You did this." Her voice was very quiet. "Daniel did this," I said. "He documented everything before he died. He knew, and he tried to tell me." The officers moved toward her. She didn't fight it. She went with a composure I found more disturbing than rage would have been. At the door, she turned once more, and I thought she was going to say something terrible. Instead, she said nothing. She looked at me for a long moment, and then she was gone. I stood at my window and watched the vehicles pull away. Then I sat down and drank my coffee, which had gone cold. The civil trial ran for 2 weeks in February, 5 months after Daniel's death. Christine Lalonde was precise and merciless in the way that she had promised she would be. Patricia Beausoleil testified about the financial fraud, $41,000 systematically stripped from my son's accounts, forged authorization on the insurance policy, a pattern of deception spanning nearly 2 years. Frank Thibodeau testified about the unauthorized service visit and identified Kyle Merritt from security footage. Robert Desmarais testified about his surveillance findings. The recordings were played in full. Kyle Merritt testified under his cooperation agreement with the Crown. He had accepted a plea to second-degree murder guilty, no trial, a minimum of 10 years before parole eligibility under Canada's criminal code. In exchange, he testified fully against my daughter-in-law. He described her approaching him a year before Daniel's death, how she'd proposed the plan with a thoroughness that had surprised even him, how she had researched the insurance policy timing, the route Daniel drove, the vulnerability of the braking system, how she had brought Daniel's car to Frank's shop specifically to give Kyle access to it for a preliminary inspection before the full brake service that would reset any evidence of prior interference, how she had told him to wait until after the policy anniversary to reduce scrutiny, how she had specified the night and the location and told him to ensure it looked like component failure. He said all of this without looking at her. She sat at the defense table with her lawyer, expressionless through all of it, until Kyle described the phone call she had made to him the morning of Daniel's death, when she confirmed the accident had been reported and that the plan had worked. Then something crossed her face that I had no name for. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. The verdict was for the plaintiff. Total damages of $1.9 million. My daughter-in-law and Kyle Merritt found jointly liable for the wrongful death of Daniel Holt. I did not feel triumph. I want to be honest about that because the story deserves honesty. I felt the particular exhaustion of a long thing that has finally ended. I felt that my son's death had been seen clearly, named correctly, assigned its proper weight in a formal proceeding before 12 citizens of this province who had listened carefully and decided that his life had mattered. That was what I had needed. I had not known that was what I needed until the foreman read the verdict, and I felt something in my chest release that I had been holding since November. The criminal sentencing followed 6 weeks later. My daughter-in-law had accepted a plea agreement on the advice of her counsel. First-degree murder under the Criminal Code of Canada carries a mandatory life sentence with no eligibility for parole for 25 years. The Crown had been prepared to take it to trial. She chose not to. The judge asked if she had anything to say before sentencing. She read from a prepared statement that she was sorry for the pain her actions had caused, that she had made terrible choices she could not undo, that she hoped in time there could be forgiveness. The judge let her finish. Then he said that the evidence presented in the civil proceeding, which he had reviewed thoroughly, demonstrated not an impulsive act, but a prolonged, methodical conspiracy that involved forging documents, deceiving a spouse over 18 months, arranging his murder for financial gain, and then engineering the theft of his remaining estate from his bereaved father. He said he found no basis for leniency. Life sentence. No parole eligibility for 25 years. The gavel came down. I watched them lead her out. Kyle Merritt had been sentenced the week before. Guilty plea to second-degree murder. Life sentence. Parole eligibility after 10 years. He had wept during his statement. He said he had no explanation that was adequate. He said he was sorry to me directly, looking at where I sat. I did not respond. I did not look away either. 2 days after the sentencing, Christine called to confirm that Manulife had formally voided the insurance claim. The $800,000 would not be paid to my daughter-in-law's estate. The provincial government had begun proceedings to seize her assets toward the civil judgment. She had killed my son for money she would never receive. Margaret Okafor came to see me that March, the first warm Saturday of the year, when the last of the snow was pulling back from the edges of my yard. We sat on the back porch with coffee, and she told me that the firm was naming a Structural Integrity Award after Daniel, given annually to the junior engineer who demonstrated the most rigorous commitment to precision and safety. She said his colleagues had proposed it unanimously. I managed to thank her. Later that afternoon, I drove to the cemetery in Napanee where Daniel was buried. The ground was soft from the thaw. His headstone was simple granite, the way he would have wanted things, nothing excessive. I stood there and told him what had happened. All of it, from Margaret's phone call to the sentencing. I told him about the emails he had found, that he had been right, that his instincts had been correct, that he had tried to protect himself and had not had enough time. I told him I wished he had called me sooner, and that I understood why he hadn't, and that I did not blame him for trusting the wrong person, because that is a deeply human failing, and he was a deeply human person, and I had loved him for all of it. I put my hand on the cold stone. You tried to tell me, I said. That last phone call, 2 weeks before. You had something important to say, and you didn't get to say it. I know what it was now. I heard it eventually. The wind came off the fields to the south, carrying the cold, clean smell of early spring in eastern Ontario. I drove home along the highway, The same highway. I did not look away from it. I let myself drive it the way I would drive any road, because Daniel had driven it 1,000 times safely, and it was not the road that had taken him. That evening I sat in my living room with the lights on, and a glass of wine from a bottle Daniel had brought me 2 Christmases ago. A good Niagara Riesling he'd said I had to try, that I had kept in the back of the cupboard without opening. I opened it now. It was excellent. I drank 1 glass slowly and thought about him, not with the focused, cold intensity of the investigation, but the way you think about someone you loved when the war is over and there is finally room for it. He had been a careful man who built things meant to last. He had noticed things were wrong and documented them, because that is what careful people do. He had tried to protect himself, and he had tried to warn me, and the warning had arrived too late for him, and just in time for me. Justice in these situations is never a fair trade. I want to be clear about that. 25 years in a federal institution does not balance against my son's life. No number would. But it is the correct response of a society that takes seriously what it means to conspire to murder a person for money. It is the response that says his death was not nothing, that it was seen and named, and that those responsible will carry it for the rest of their lives, the way I will carry it for the rest of mine. The bottle said it would pair well with aged cheddar and mild dishes. Daniel had written on the gift tag, "Dad, stop drinking that cheap stuff. You've earned better. D." I raised the glass to the empty room. "You were right," I said. I had. If this story moved you, please subscribe to the channel and leave a comment below. To hear the next story, click on the video on your left. Thank you for being here.